Welcome to Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear AI researchers chat about what's going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we'll provide summaries and discussion of some of last week's most interesting AI news. You can also check out our Last Week in AI newsletter at lastweekin.ai for articles we did not cover in this episode. Before we start, if you have any feedback or thoughts about our podcast, feel free to email us at contact@lastweekin.ai. We'd love to hear from you. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Sharon Zhou.
And I am your other host, PhD student Andrei Kurenkov. And this week, we'll be discussing some systems for detecting COVID variants and also technology for self-farming. We'll be discussing art authentication and research on speech recognition that uses video. We'll talk some about facial recognition and jobs and end with a few fun stories about beer and robot dogs. So to hit things off, we have our applications and business stories, starting with the story BioNTech and London A.I. create early warning system for COVID-19 variants. So this is an article discussing the paper Early Computational Detection of Potential High Risks SARS-CoV-2 Variants. And as the title suggests, it's all about detecting variants that are bad, like what we've seen with Delta and Omicron. And essentially, it summarizes how these two companies, BioNTech, the German biotech company that pioneered the messenger RNA technology behind the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. This company has partnered with the London company InstaDeep to create this early warning system. And this article goes into a lot of detail. Essentially, it's a lot of stuff I don't understand, having to do with biology and chemistry. But the end results is that they can rank variants in terms of how bad they seem, and their system could pick out 12 of the 13 coronavirus variants that the World Health Organization has designated as potentially dangerous. So pretty cool. And then also to add to that, we have a second article. This AI software nearly predicted Omicron's tricky structure, where the last article actually, there's no real deep learning. It's using more old techniques, which is kind of interesting. Whereas in this one, it's all about how this researcher, Colby Ford, just after the WHO said that Omicron is a variant of concern, basically before any lab could go and figure out its protein structure in detail, he used the really new AI methods, DeepMind's AlphaFold and the similar RosettaFold, to just from the DNA figure out the protein structure, and in fact was pretty accurate. So that's also really exciting. It shows that now we can really respond much more quickly because of these sorts of research papers.
Yeah, I think this is huge because otherwise he would have had to, go out for lab supplies, buy them, and then do all these experiments, when now he can just run open source software, which, anyone can run, any of the labs can run it now. So I think this will help with vaccine development. It'll help with, understanding new variants. This will help with a lot of things. And I'm very excited to see this research really going out into the real world and helping something very immediate.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. In the article, it goes into how this other group actually ordered these samples from the WHO and had to wait. And so what's cool is that this other lab that used the AI methods could predict some things accurately right away. And it also says in this article that these techniques, which just came out middle of last year, as far as open source software are already really highly adopted. So the two papers on AlphaFold and RosettaFold already have 1,200 citations in the like half year they've been around. So really are making a big impact pretty quickly, which is exciting.
It's a huge number of citations. And on to our next article. We're one step closer to self-farming farms. And this is about the self-driving John Deere 8R tractor that can plow fields, avoid obstacles, and actually plant crops by itself with maybe a little bit of human intervention, which is super cool. So it's a John Deere tractor that you can see on the fields, but there are 6 pairs of cameras that are kind of scanning the surroundings and using computer vision to make sure it can operate effectively. And this is very exciting because this kind of sets the stage up for farms that don't need as many people. And because there is a huge labor shortage right now, this is more and more a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty cool that some of these ideas, we've seen a lot of news about self-driving cars, but self-farming farms, as this article says, is also very useful. And in some ways, it's similar here. It's using a bunch of sensors, and the tractor can use that. And it's related to this concept of precision agriculture, which does a lot of these sort of AI related things. So you can have drones fly over the field and really do a lot of sensing and get a lot of data. And with that, you can produce more crops with less effort and less environmental impact and have higher yields. So I think, technology like this is going to be a big deal, and maybe doesn't get as much hype, but definitely I'm excited about it as far as uses of AI and uses of robotics.
Yeah, this actually, there's a huge issue with human farmers sometimes who, this might be TMI, but there are issues with human waste in the fields, which robots do not defecate. So that actually has led to a lot of, problems with disease and everything. And so from the people I've talked to in the industry, they said that they very much welcome robots, both because of the huge shortage of labor and as a result, not being able to harvest crops properly. And also how human labor is not perfect and can cause like pretty bad downstream effects. For example, like the lettuce E. coli thing with Chipotle that we've seen before, and just et cetera. Like, so you have to be much more careful about sanitation with humans.
Yeah, and also related to this, something that's still very difficult and we don't have results for, but there is a lot of work on harvesting, on basically, for instance, fruit picking. So getting apples out of trees and that sort of thing. This is very laborious work for humans. It's, back breaking, you got to go all day. And there is a labor shortage for that sort of thing. And you can imagine it would be really nice if we could have robots do that, as robots don't get tired and don't get injuries and all that sort of thing. So that's something that's also in development and, still not there, but I think is something to look forward to. And also, in this whole area, we have precision weed killing and basically using these pesticides in a minimal way instead of just spraying it everywhere, which of course also would be beneficial. So there's a lot of aspects here where AI and robotics could be a big deal. And I think over the coming decades, we'll really see that come about.
And honestly, it's a great test bed in terms of agriculture because there are fewer people around to hurt. So in terms of any kind of self-driving vehicle, this is a much safer test bed, or at least you'll have much less human damage if something goes wrong. That being said, you will have downstream problems if you do mess up something with the food.
Alrighty, and then moving on to our research news stories, we have the first one titled "We Were Blown Away: How New AI Research is Changing the Way Conservators and Collectors Think About Attribution." So this is about the paper "Discerning the Painter's Hand: Machine Learning on Surface Topography," and it basically details a new technique that can attribute a painting to a particular artist. It can say, based on these patches of the image, it's most likely that this particular artist painted that and not this one. And there's some interesting details here. It uses very, very high resolution scans of these paintings. So, paintings aren't flat, right? You have all these bumps and so on from the paint, and it uses incredibly high resolution scans where you can really tell the very minute differences. And based on just little patches of the image, they trained this computer vision model to then be able to predict which artist did what. And as you can imagine, for art people, the art world, they care about forgeries. So this could be very useful.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first saw this article, I first thought, oh, is this about, deep fakes or something? But this is, I guess, around human created fakes and trying to understand, the different styles across different artists, which is not unlike trying to figure out the different styles of different generators that are generating fake data. So it's very interesting to see this being applied on human art forgery.
Yeah, and there's some neat details in this paper. So, for instance, the researchers asked students from the Cleveland Institute of Arts to paint 4 identical yellow flowers in bloom. And then they, in their experiments, actually tried to attribute these 4 identical paintings to the particular artist. So, I think that's a fun detail where to actually do a paper, you had to produce new paintings by individual people, which is not something you often see.
And on to our next article. Meta claims its AI improves speech recognition quality by reading lips. Okay, so this is a post about their Meta's paper, which is formerly known as Facebook, called "Learning Audio-Visual Speech Representation by Masked Multimodal Cluster Prediction" and Audio-Visual Hidden Unit BERT, AV Hubert. And AV Hubert is a framework that learns to understand speech by watching and hearing people speak. So it looks at a video of someone speaking, your lip movements, and it also hears the audio of what you're saying. And that can help improve speech recognition considerably. And what's interesting is I think they claim that AV Hubert is 75% more accurate than the state of the art using the same number of transcriptions, but that it also performs really well with small amounts of data. So it can do better than the state of the art with only 10% of the data. So it can therefore be useful for languages that don't have as much audio data. And this is, often actually maybe a problem for audio, much more so than text, because there's just so much less audio out there.
Yeah. This is a pretty cool paper. We've seen this sort of research in the past. Actually, this article goes over some of that, where you combine video and audio. And this very intuitively would help in cases where it's like a noisy environment. You have music in the background or something. Just having audio is not as useful as video and audio. But what's neat here is most of the training is unsupervised, so you don't need paired data of audio and video. They use a little bit just to kickstart it, and then they do the rest in an unsupervised fashion. So they have 30 hours of labeled videos where you have paired things and from TED Talks, which is interesting. And then they, in an unsupervised fashion, train on 2,400 hours of English language videos of celebrities on YouTube. And that helps a lot. One thing I found cool is that this is actually extending Hubert from last year, which we talked about, which is Facebook's work on learning to do speech recognition on audio in an unsupervised fashion. So we talked about that, how it's interesting, how you could even accomplish that, recognize speech without having labeled audio. And now they've already extended that to both audio and video. Definitely going to be useful in the future.
Definitely going to be useful in the future. I agree.
And on to our society and ethics stories. First up, we have the messy history of facial recognition company Clearview AI, which I wrote. So we're going to talk about it a bit. Yeah, so this is on our last week in .ai newsletter.
Seems like an okay post. I'm not sure.
I think it's okay.
I'm joking. It's amazing.
But yeah, as any regular listeners know, we talk about Clearview AI a lot. We talk about it, I don't know, like probably 10 times in the past year or something. And so this post of mine basically summarizes all the things we've talked about and we've seen with regards to Clearview AI in the past couple of years. So if you're kind of interested in seeing the progression of its history, this might be interesting. And what I found interesting looking back and summarizing things is that actually Clearview AI was working kind of in obscurity and wasn't well known until the start of 2020, when a New York Times expose basically revealed it and explained a lot of what it was doing. And then BuzzFeed also had an article about it. So this expose from New York Times was this secretive company that might end privacy as we know it. A few months before we started the podcast in January of 2020. And then over the next few months, you have a dozen news stories, and there's really a flood of responses to it. So yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to realize looking back that this was very much a press coverage driven event. The New York Times and BuzzFeed basically highlighted that Clearview was collecting all this data from all over the internet, and then YouTube and Facebook and other companies sent their cease and desist letters, and the ACLU sued Clearview, and all these things happened. And to this day, we're still seeing Clearview operating. We've talked about them potentially getting a patent soon for facial recognition, which is interesting. But yeah, looking back, I think it's interesting to see how much happened in early 2020 when it just surfaced, basically.
And the saga definitely continues, as there's been another recent article titled "The Fed's Spending on Facial Recognition Tech Expands Despite Privacy Concerns." And so on December 30th, the FBI actually signed a deal with Clearview AI for an $18,000 subscription license to the facial recognition technology at Clearview. And this, the article discusses how this might seem like not too much for the FBI that has a $10 billion budget, but it definitely is signaling, hey, we have this relationship with Clearview. We want to actually pursue this. So this is the direction things are going in. I know things were, obviously against Clearview in the beginning, but now it really is just, they're gaining customers left and right.
Yeah, exactly. From looking back over kind of what you've seen so far, internationally, Clearview has really been blocked on a lot of fronts. Canada, it's illegal to operate in. We've discussed over the last couple of months how France, the UK, also Australia, all basically pushed it out and find it as well, and ordered them to delete data relevant to their citizens. But within the US, there are some lawsuits, but still they're only kind of local, state, or kind of more local laws that have been passed. So it remains to be seen very much what winds up happening. And I think hopefully within this year, we'll have some sort of regulation. There have been some laws proposed, some bills in Congress that would regulate it, but those are still in progress. So we'll see how that goes.
And on to our next article, a great resignation versus increasing investment in AI, robotics, and automation, a troubling trend. So unemployment definitely fell in the last jobs report in December, down to only 3.9%. But that is actually, covering up something that's much more troubling. So there is actually, a record number of people did quit their jobs in 2021, over 40 million. And the U.S. Private Sector Job Quality Index, the JQI, shows that the quality of jobs has actually declined significantly. And there's this increase in what's called lower level jobs and a decrease in those willing to, work those jobs. And this is creating this very interesting incentive structure that is tipping in favor of robotics, AI, and automation in general. So this means the labor force is not as interested in a lot of the lower level jobs. And, I've been hearing people talk about, too many people have college degrees and want, a certain type of job, but there's not as much need for those jobs, and all the other jobs are being kind of overlooked, and people are having trouble finding like a plumber or something like that, because those are harder to find people to fill.
Yeah, I often find it interesting in kind of a hot labor market when you walk around and just in every restaurant and every fast food place, there's a sign that says hiring. And that's very much been what I've seen. So, and I do think this article has an interesting point that, even if there are jobs, if people aren't interested in doing them, then maybe companies will just go ahead and do automation, even if they wouldn't have otherwise. And so, I think it's important to look at not just the unemployment rate, but also the labor participation rate in the US, which has been on the decline. Basically meaning unemployment rate only looks at the share of people who have a job who are looking for a job. So the people not looking for a job aren't counted. And the labor participation rate is how many people are looking for a job that are of age. And that's at a low. That's kind of hit a high in around the 2000s, and then is kind of the lowest point since then now. So I think it's good to know. And this article has some interesting points, although it's, still too early to tell what's going to happen in this coming year and in this decade. But something to, I think about.
Yeah, at the same time, it's I don't think robots are quite ready for a lot of these tasks, since even opening a door is very non-trivial for a robot. Like any door, it can open certain doors very easily. But the article does cite this, it's going to be so scary, if we have this robot that is perhaps being used for childcare, but and it could be very useful or attractive to certain employers, but I don't think we're going to be there yet super soon with some of this technology. So there might be a bit of time where there's this huge gap, and it's unclear what that gap might look like.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the job. A few of them, for instance, trucking, which is a huge occupation. It's the number one occupation in a majority of U.S. states, and if I remember correctly, possibly all of the U.S. And that is an area where there has been labor shortage, and as you can imagine, is could be thought of as lower quality. It's lower paying for sure. So that kind of job, and working at, let's say, an Amazon fulfillment center, that also presumably is not a very nice job, and there's a lot of turnover. So these there are examples of things that are very amenable to automation, because we can have self-driving trucks, we can have robotic arms that don't need to open doors but just pick up objects. So definitely it seems like we'll have some of that in the coming decade, and I guess the question is how much. And it's easy to kind of overstate how much automation is going to happen because of AI, but we'll definitely see more of it this decade, I think.
And on to our fun section of articles. GitHub Copilot wants to play chess instead of code. And so this is a blog post that uses GitHub Copilot to write English instead of code. And it can actually do fairly well on certain tasks, which is not surprising because it is based on GPT-3, which is more or less trained to do that. And it also has been able to handle comments fairly well, writing code based on a comment, but also writing comments itself. And I've actually noticed this myself when I'm playing with Copilot. So I'm not super surprised. But what's funny is that the author of the blog post actually writes out, or like a Q&A with the robot. So like basically a chatbot through Copilot. And it was funny that it did get certain things to work. So it asked like the person asked, "Are you here?" And it said, "Yes, I'm here." Like, "Who are you?" "I'm a computer program." "Why are you acting like a human?" "Because I am programmed to do so." And "What's your name?" "My name is Eliza, but you can call me Eliza or Eliza the computer." So that's kind of funny, like as like a hark back to Eliza there, but it's funny that a lot of that is encoded into the model still.
Yeah, it's quite amusing to me as well. It's just funny that this is supposed to be for code completion, but as you said, because it's fine-tuned from the more general GPT-3, you can have all these other things of auto-completing songs and having conversations with it and so on. And this blog post is quite fun. It has a lot of GIFs showing these sort of things. And yeah, I wonder if this is actually good, whether this could impede sort of equality or lead to unexpected nonsense in some cases, and whether as a product, it would make more sense to make it very specific to programming. But, I guess why not? For now, if you want to mess with it, you can go ahead and just try it and have some fun with it. And on to our second fun story. I'm pretty excited about this one. We have AIML machine learning students develop beer using AI. So this is about students at the University of Adelaide. This pair of students, Christopher Fusco and Josh Vera, were interning at, I guess, the Barossa Valley Brewing Company, and they developed a machine learning model to basically rank how good beer recipes could be for craft beer. They collected a bunch of data from the internet, and it actually worked. They could evaluate a bunch of potential recipes. They got a few candidates, and these people at the Barossa Valley Brewing chose one and actually made it, and it will be sold this month. So I would say that's definitely a fun use of AI, but also useful.
I would question whether it is actually necessary here.
I think it's like anything with creative AI, you might get something interesting.
Okay.
There's actually a quote in this article where, so there's this interesting quote from this person in charge of brewery. It was asked what the beer tastes like, and the response was, "It tastes like the future. Seriously, it's a fruit-driven IPA, which I'm very proud of and can't wait to release." So, yeah, I don't know. I guess creating craft beer is an artistic process, and we've seen AI be used for painting and other things and music, and why not for making beer?
That quote is pretty funny. It tastes like the future.
Tastes like the future. That's some good marketing.
I feel like it's only sold because of that quote and that sentiment, the feeling of novelty. But I will let it. Maybe it's way more. I don't know enough about beer to really be commenting intelligently about this. So.
Exactly. And to be fair, this was an internship project, so I think it wasn't meant to be anything too serious. This Barossa Valley Brewing is a pretty small company, so it's just an interesting demonstration of what two people over a few months can do. I would imagine it was just 2 months, and yeah, good for them for doing something unique. And I, as far as I know, probably something that hasn't been done before.
Yeah, I don't think it has. I think it's pretty cool. And on to our last article, Robo-dogs and therapy bots, artificial intelligence goes cuddly. So Japan has seen a huge uptick in social robots over the past few years. And this is definitely, related to COVID isolation, as well as their declining population, where they have many, many elderly. And a lot of these therapy bots are very so they're robots, but they're very they're very animal-y and cuddly in that way. So one of them is a robotic puppy, Aibo. Lovat, it looks kind of like a penguin. Kubo is a pillow that has a motorized cat tail, and when you pet it, it responds. Part of the robot we've mentioned before looks like a seal, and it's used for therapeutic uses. And they're making their way into hospitals, elderly care homes, classrooms, and it's quite interesting to see so many on the market there. And yeah, what are your thoughts on these? Would you want one?
Yeah, well, I think we discussed this a bit before a couple of times. And yeah, I'm a big fan of this. And in general, I think it's very useful. Obviously, it's a really good to help people with loneliness, and it's good for helping some people develop social skills. For instance, autistic kids, this could be good for them. And even there's been studies that showed that it can help with PTSD and anxiety and things like that. Just like pets can. Obviously, this is not as good, but it's better than nothing. And personally, yeah, I would love to have one. That being said, Aibo, this robotic puppy, costs $3,000, so I'm not going to be able to afford it anytime soon. But this pillow with a motorized cattail is only $200, And I don't know. I would say that's a pretty good gift. Nobody would expect that to be gifted on their birthday.
No one will expect that. That is true. No one will expect it. You're right.
Yeah, instead of just getting a good old, cute plushy animal, get them a cute plushy robot.
Yeah, the move. I mean, I can see someone giving you that, because of your work in robotics. So
That's true. That's true. But yeah, no, I think it's fun, but also it's quite serious in the sense of, I think it's a great application, and I think it's an area that people don't associate robotics so much yet, in terms of, there's more association with automation and the Terminator and so on. But hopefully, as these sort of proliferate, people will realize that kind of friendly robots are a really nice thing to have around, and just to cheer you up a bit, instead of just being as we have been in COVID, just in these isolated, boring environments, I suppose.
That is right. And with that, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast. But before we really go, please let us know any thoughts you have directly to our email, contact@lastweekin.ai. Again, you can find the articles we discussed here today and subscribe to our weekly newsletter with similar ones at lastweekin.ai.
Yep, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Probably you are already subscribed, but if not, go ahead. And if you are subscribed, please give us a rating and a review on iTunes or elsewhere. We always like to see new ones, and we, I think, still haven't hit 10. So that would be very exciting. If we get to 10 reviews, that would just make my day. So if you like a podcast, I would say
let us know.
just jump on. We have a link in the episode description. Go ahead and give us, I would say, 4 stars. Personally, I think it's a 4-star podcast.
No, 6.
If you 6 out of 5. Well, the average to 5. So we recommend a 5-star review, but you can make up your own mind. Anyway, with that out of the way, we hope you enjoyed this podcast. Our first one of 2022 as far as these regular episodes. And be sure to tune in to our future ones for the rest of 2022.